YouTube channel. We're here with another virtual author event for you, and very happy if you're joining us tonight. Today we have Zak Salih in conversation with Steven Rowley. Zak's going to be talking about his novel, Let's Get Back to the Party. Very excited to hear the conversation between these two novelists. If you're tuning in on the YouTube channel, a reminder that you should have also received an email with your $5 discount code for use at majorsandquinn.com. Majors and Quinn is an independent bookstore in Minneapolis, Minnesota. If you're not familiar with us, if this is your first Majors and Quinn event, welcome. My name is Annie. I'm the marketing and events coordinator here, and we just are so pleased to have you. You can use that coupon code at majorsandquinn.com. Of course, we highly encourage you to use it to snag your copy of Let's Get Back to the Party, which has just recently been published by Algonquin Books, but it is usable for anything on the website, including if you're interested in looking at books by Steven Rowley as well. Let me introduce our speakers really quickly before I get out of the way and let them have their conversation. Zak Salih lives in Washington, D.C. His writing has appeared in Crazy Horse, The Chattahoochee Review, The Millions, The Rumpus, and other publications. Let's Get Back to the Party is his first novel, so congratulations, Zak. And Steven Rowley is the author of the novels The Editor and The Lily and the Octopus and The Guncle, which has been, Lily and the Octopus has been translated into 19 languages. He has worked as a freelance writer, newspaper columnist, and screenwriter. Originally from Portland, Maine, Rowley is a graduate of Emerson College and now lives in California. Thank you both so much for being here. We are going to get to your conversation in just a moment. I do want to also remind people that if you have questions for either of these two guys, you can write them in the chat that is underneath this video. So let us know where you're watching from and also ask your questions at any point throughout the broadcast. We will get to them at the end of the event. Thanks so much and enjoy.
Thank you. This is my first Majors and Quinn event. I don't know about you.
Yeah, mine as well. So this is great.
So hello, Minneapolis, and everyone tuning in from across the country. This is what's been great about I mean, if there's anything good about now, these virtual events that we can sort of tune in from anywhere across the country. I have, if you don't necessarily have authors who come to your town or whatnot, you can really tune in from anywhere, and I've been taking advantage of that because my town doesn't have an independent bookstore.
Really?
Yeah, should I open one?
Well, I don't know. I thought you were in Los Angeles.
I'm in Palm Springs now.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I have actually never been to California. No. I've been to San Francisco, so I wouldn't. Yeah, I'm ignorant about that part of the country. But I hear it's lovely. I hear it's a lot better than what's going on over here lately.
Well, I mean that's on a sliding scale. You're in Washington D.C., so what's been going on in Washington D.C. of late has been really crazy.
Yeah. It's strange thinking that all this stuff is going on in your backyard, even though, I still live somewhat removed. I used to live right downtown, like blocks away from the White House, and have since moved to a different part of the city. But the city is small enough that an event like that, let alone the last 4 years, really just does feel like it's happening right in your backyard. And it's crazy. It's somewhat surreal that things that everyone else consumes as news is kind of like local community news for us.
Yeah, that is really, that's hard to adjust to, I imagine. But we won't dwell on that the whole evening. But I love Washington, D.C. My sister lives in D.C. and what a great book town. So many great bookstores in D.C.
So many, especially over the last maybe 3 or 4 years. It's just, I mean, this is such a literate city. So yeah.
It really is. And it's more than just politicians hawking their books. There's a really vibrant literary scene in Washington, D.C.
Yes. So, and I am proud to report there is nary a Politico to be found in this book, which was one of my chief responsibilities to myself, was to make sure that the lay people of Washington, D.C. were represented.
We're well represented. Exactly. Yes. Well, it is, I lived in Los Angeles for many years. Something that's known as an industry town, people forget there is, everything else that you can think of is also there. It just gets overshadowed by the industry.
Yes. Normal people, we're everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. So that book is Let's Get Back to the Party. Which I can never say without saying it like Kristen Wiig in Bridesmaids. Get back to the party.
Okay. Yeah.
But if ever there was an aptly titled book for right now, because I am desperate to get back to the party or real life or some semblance of. But what a joy to read this book. Congratulations, first of all, on your debut. I feel for debut authors right now. You're not quite getting the full experience, but how's it been? You've been enjoying?
It's been. I will say I feel like I'm kind of in, for lack of a better term, a second wave of debuters. That's not really a very appropriate term to use. But I feel like the authors who debuted this time last year, I mean, they really were kind of entering into an unknown world. So I'm really just kind of following their example and the examples that independent bookstores have set up and kind of keeping the conversation between readers and writers going. So in that regard, Steven, I have nothing to really compare it to. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the status quo. I feel like the real culture shock will be when I actually have to do this in front of other people. It's
I'll tell you, I have a book coming out. I have a book coming out in May, so it will be a shock for me to do it all virtually, because I do, there are plenty of authors who I'm sure are thriving right now, who are introverts or do not want to go out publicly, do not want to. Okay, so this is working out for you. However, I want to be on the airplanes. I want the hotel rooms. I want people to take me out for drinks afterwards. I want to meet readers in person.
Oh, Steven, live the dream for the rest of us, please.
All right, I'll go out there and I'll stay out on the road, because as long as I'm on the road, I don't actually have to write, which is a good thing.
Right.
So sure. Do I want to get up and go to the airport at 6 a.m. every morning on tour? No, but will I do it rather than write? Yes.
Well, and you don't find that draining at all? I mean,
it's exhausting, and you can't live your life that way. But boy, can you have a lot of fun for a
and there's a
brief
thrill,
window,
right? Whether it's in person or whether it's virtual. I mean, there really just is a thrill about having spent so many years on a personal project and now, having shared it with everyone, right? And there's a real kind of danger there, but it also is just very exciting to hear from strangers who really have no obligation to be kind to you whatsoever.
And not all of them are. Most of them are, but not everyone.
Fair enough. And to just to just make those kind of connections. I feel like whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, that really means a lot. It's a wonderful feeling.
But we don't understand, like, it takes years to write a book, and or I shouldn't speak for you, but it takes me years to write a book, and so it's so personally and individually and uniquely yours for such a long time, and only yours. And now that it belongs to anybody who plunks down the price to buy it, so use your $5 coupon to order.
And
let's get back to the party.
Pre-order the Gunkel as well.
You can pre-order the Gunkel. Maybe there's a 2-for-1 discount. Who knows? But anyway, now the story is out there and people can consume it and react to it, and any way that they're pleased. And it is no longer yours. It's a unique time, in a book's life. But I do feel grateful that because of Twitter and social media and whatnot, and we've become friendly on social media. We've yet to meet in person, but I'm so grateful that we have. We will. I'll come to DC. That we have the ability to reach out to authors. Even myself as a reader, if I read something I really love, I'm not shy about reaching out and connecting with that author, and I do love that, because I grew up in rural Maine. And I always wanted to be a writer, but I sort of felt like if I weren't, sort of born in Manhattan or didn't have a recognizable family name, that it would not be something that was available to me. But so now I love being able to connect with students, particularly.
But see, it's great, because all you really need I suppose it's kind of democratic in that sense. Maybe not publishing, but certainly just the act of writing. I mean, anyone can do it. You just need to have a willpower and I think a love of reading and a love of books is I think that's kind of inarguably essential. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm an omnivorous reader. I grew up in a house surrounded by books. I mean, reading was just, it was not a strange activity. It was as natural as eating or breathing to my younger sisters and I. And so there just comes a point where you spend so much time in other people's stories. You're like, well, gee, I wonder what it would be like to write a story of my own, not realizing how fraught that whole process can be. But I feel like that's the kind of drive to want to instill in a reader the same kind of feelings that you get from other people's works, whether they make you laugh or arouse you or terrify you or just to elicit that kind of response. It's quite a really interesting power to just do that through words.
Yeah, well, you make an excellent point too. It is sort of the great equalizer. We can all write, unlike sort of filmmaking or painting or photography or some other art forms that require an outlay of cash.
Yeah.
And some are more collaborative arts like filmmaking than others. So this is something you can really do on your own. But I want to get into this. Please do ask questions because I'd much rather talk about what everybody would like to hear about.
My dog is
yeah. Who's down there sniffing?
That's Susie.
Okay. Hi, Susie. So I want to get into this, but it's very clear to me that you love books, that you are a reader. That's no surprise because the prose in this book is gorgeous.
It's very kind of you to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I stopped finding myself rereading sentences several times because I was so taken with them.
Mm-hmm.
But where I sort of want to start with, you said this idea like you want to see your own story represented, or you want to take a turn at trying to share a story. This is a very specific moment, and I always encourage people too. If you don't see yourself represented, you can be the one to tell your story. There's a very specific moment in time right now, and it's sort of the time between the Obergefell Supreme Court decision that made marriage equality the law of the land,
mm-hmm.
and the Pulse nightclub shooting.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There was a lot made a few years ago when we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, but gay history is still being written and being made, and that was a particularly vibrant couple years. In there. What made you sort of want to start writing about that, or what about that time sort of?
Well, it was
as a jumping off point.
Yeah, well, it was actually a year almost to the day that those two events happened, and so when I had that realization, which oddly enough I didn't have until I had kind of committed myself to writing, it just seemed like a very kind of interesting laboratory in which to kind of examine what it's like to be a part of this kind of hinge generation of gay men that I feel like I belong to. Right, I have no personal stories about the AIDS plague. I learned about it as history, not as lived experience. And then on the opposite end, you see, there's so much more increased visibility for same-sex couples, for queer people. And that too, I kind of didn't get to take advantage of as well, right? Like there was no GSA in my high school. Mm-hmm. I didn't feel comfortable coming out until I was into graduate school. So kind of considering those experiences and thinking of that year between 2015 and 2016 as just this perfect example of again, like you were saying, how we are continuing to live queer history, right? You have this moment of just incredible public pride and celebration, and then almost exactly a year later, there's just this incredible moment of public trauma, and it just the ways in which public celebration and public mourning kind of shape our ideas about what it means to belong to a community. Those were kind of the overarching ideas that really interested me in sitting down to actually write the book.
Yeah. So the book focuses sort of on two main characters, Sebastian and Oscar, who sort of represent two sides of that hinge. If you're in the hinge generation, there's sort of two sides of that hinge who have very different feelings about what it means to be gay or to be queer in this time. One sort of holding on to a historical model, perhaps, of what it means to be queer, and one more willing and open to embrace change and the progress that we've accepted. And it's sort of really fascinating to me because you accomplished so much through so much of this conversation through those two characters. How do you create characters without, that are so representative of two specific viewpoints and not make them archetypes?
Well, I'm certainly happy to hear that they didn't come across as
no, not at all,
because that certainly wasn't my intention. I mean, I definitely I'm interested in extremes. I think the people in my social circle, I prefer to be kind of moderate and temperate. But I think when it comes to the kind of books I like to read, I really do. I enjoy people who live on these emotional extremes, and so I've always kind of felt in my own personal experience that anger and sadness for whatever reason have been these really two kind of pole star emotions for me, and I think I suspect for a lot of other gay men and queer people as well. So I wanted these two characters who were kind of living on these extremes of a spectrum of lived experience, and honestly, I just wanted to see what would happen when you put the two of them together, and see this kind of clash, which is also a real shame, right? Because they're members of the same tribe and the same community. But even within a community, people can just have varyingly different ideas about how to live. And to be clear, none of these are right or wrong. It's just a matter of personal perspective and again of lived experience. And so just kind of taking Sebastian and Oscar's ideas of what it means to be a queer man and mashing them up and just kind of seeing what happened. That was the real drive for the book for me.
Yeah, and it is interesting because I was just struck by this because I just watched the Russell Davies miniseries.
Yes, I have.
Have you seen that?
No, I'm heard it's
okay.
Great.
So I'm not going to spoil anything.
Okay,
but one of the characters said this line, just sort of off the cuff, that talking about the backdrop. This series sort of in London in the 1980s against the backdrop of the AIDS pandemic then, and was worried when the history of that time was written that people wouldn't talk about how much fun it was to be gay.
Yeah,
and that struck me while concurrently reading your book, because your book does deal with a lot of sadness and not in a everyone I know is dying kind of way, but and different kinds of sadness, just sort of a melancholy, not sure where we fit in. There's an entire generation of queer men above us who are sort of missing, and I don't know that as a community you'd ever know how to reconcile that or deal with that or come to terms with it. So there is so much about queer life that is resiliently celebratory, right?
Absolutely.
We dance, music is party for, unfortunately sometimes drugs and alcohol play too big of a role, but there's this immense fun to it, but there's also this thread of different types of sadness, and I was really struck how you sort of work that into the sort of background of into the thread of your book.
Yeah, well, I mean, Steven, melancholy is kind of like my factory setting.
Well, it's interesting now too, against the backdrop of another pandemic, where we're all sort of feeling isolated and alone, and there's a lot of sadness right now. Just sort of
there's the personal sadness that one kind of experiences in one's everyday life, right? And then it's very interesting to juxtapose that between against larger kind of historical issues, whether it's the AIDS plague, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a world war, whatever. There's that, and I find it really kind of interesting and also maybe somewhat troubling, that kind of gap between experience, like here I am feeling like I have this miserable life and people are actually dying, right? So there's that kind of level of just kind of inequality of experience. Yeah, there's a lot to be upset about. There's a lot to be angry about. There's a lot to be sad about, more so now than when I wrote this book. Unfortunately, history just always, the world rather, just always has a way of kind of proving us wrong, and thinking that there's so much cause to celebrate. Like there's so much cause to celebrate marriage equality, but then when you think about what's coming down the road, not just the Pulse nightclub shooting, but you think of all the civil rights rollbacks of the subsequent 4 years,
the past 4 years,
government. It's just no party lasts forever.
Yeah, I think part of it too, that what I found so interesting, and now, I'm older than you, so I came out in the very early 1990s.
Okay.
And so more people were dying then of AIDS even than at any point in the 80s. Like that was still like such a part of my coming out was fear.
Sure.
Absolute sort of terror that this might be what lied ahead for me. But also, I've seen things change so fast, and that sort of us sort of in the middle, and I put myself maybe at the very forefront of this sort of hinge generation. Like when I came out, I never thought I would see gay marriage in my lifetime. And the way I dealt with that was a hardening against the very idea of marriage. It was almost like a self-protecting kind of, okay, you don't want me? Well, that's great, because I don't want you.
You have to build armor. Yeah.
Yeah. And so just because marriage became legal, and I'm talking to you as an engaged man.
Congratulations.
But just because what became legal in 2015 and I had a part, didn't mean I felt the need to rush out and do it. There was a lot of sort of having to reconcile, okay, well wait, now how do I really feel about the institution itself, and what can I bring to it, and how can I make it work for me necessarily? So there's an incredible amount of like whiplash over the change that we've seen. The queer community, incredible organizers, incredible force for change. But also there's like a little whiplash in there too, that it makes sense that people don't quite understand how to, like Oscar and Sebastian, how to feel and how to define themselves.
Yeah. Well, and there's just so many mixed messages, right? There are cultural messages as well, telling, and there are all these kind of competing ideas of right and wrong ways to be a gay man or to be a queer person. And I found that in my own personal experience, I mean, most of that stuff is just, I don't know. I was telling someone else a few days ago, I feel like we could all stand to be a little more apathetic about what people choose to do with their personal life. This is obviously not very exciting for a novel. There's probably no conflict when no one cares what their lives. But it's, I mean, this is part of the experience, right? And in some ways I wasn't really interested in the coming out narrative, more so as the coming into narrative, right? Like you come out of the closet, and that in itself is its own arduous journey. But then what you're left with is a new task of trying to find your place in an extremely diverse community of people, and that can be exciting and liberating and fun, and I suppose it could also be terrifying as well, especially if you don't have a very sure footing of who you are, and unfortunately I think a lot of that one can only figure out on their own. I mean, there are a lot of times where I feel like the most authentic form of pride is how you feel about yourself when you're in a room alone, right, and not surrounded by other people. And that's tough. I certainly don't want to sound like I don't struggle with it still as well, but that, it's just the coming into experience is just its own whole, strange and wonderful and journey.
Yeah, and it's so interesting when you can witness it. So I have neighbors. It used to be that a gay throuple lived behind me, and they sold their house and moved, and now a same-sex couple with kids live there, and it's so like shocking, because it's so like different ends of the spectrum. These kids, these kids scream and they scream and they scream in the swimming pool, and they never seem to drown, but they scream.
Well, that's good.
it's it's so funny to me, like the change of it was like you can see it illustrated in such like a microcosmic way.
Yeah, and again, going to your point about whiplash, like, I mean, that's an incredibly, and to see it realized, it's hard for, all novelistic conceits aside, it's just very hard for me not to think that that's great. Like, the idea of a throuple and then a same-sex married couple coexisting in the same. I mean, there's a novel right there, coexisting in
the
not
same
coexisting, but in the same house, in the same country. It's hard not to just kind of celebrate it and think about where I was when I first came out in 2005, compared to now, or where you were when you came out in you said the early 90s. I never thought about AIDS. That was not a part of my coming out process. It was certainly tinged with fear and anxiety, but the fear and anxiety that I had,
death.
It wasn't death in a sense, but it was certainly a fear of obviously being abandoned, being kicked out of my home, and I'm obviously very, very fortunate to not have that kind of horror story. And those horror stories, for all the progress we've made, they still exist. They're still out there. People like Oscar who are abandoned by their parents for coming out. I mean, how could that not destroy you? And so in crafting the character of Oscar, who's a very kind of acerbic and angry and almost like defenseless. He was my experiment in thinking, well, how would I have turned out if his path had been my path, right?
Right.
And I think how would it not harden your heart and make you just loathe any kind of emotional intimacy?
Yeah. Sebastian too is a biracial character, and so he's got one foot in two worlds that way as well, and now he sort of feels sort of caught in a sort of emerging queer existence as well. Which I thought was a very interesting choice.
Thanks.
Was that something deliberate, or are you mining some from your background, or?
I sort of mining some from my background. I mean, I am biracial. I don't have necessarily the same background as the character Sebastian. I was just interested in kind of adding another layer of kind of just identity to him. I thought it made him an interesting character to kind of himself be straddling two different worlds that are not even related to his sexuality. And I'm biased, but I like biracial people. And so I wanted that in there, and I had made a point early on that tackling race and sexuality in one book, I think, would have been too much. So given that, I mean, I certainly didn't see the need to whitewash the character, just because I wasn't going to make race the focus of his experience or of the novel. I mean, race is a very serious issue, but I have other concerns too. There are other things that interest me and worry me and things like that. So.
Yeah, for sure. You found two very different narrative styles. Like you go back and forth between the two characters, sort of narrative. Even within a chapter, you switch voices sometimes. But just the style of the writing changes between the two, and I found that so interesting. Particularly like with the dialogue being sort of written into the prose, with Sebastian and Oscar being more traditionally formatted. How did you come up with that?
I sometimes when I write, I think visually. I think about how the text is laid out on the page, and so I wanted each of their voices to just even have a distinct look and feel that maybe kind of illustrated or emphasized their emotional states, right? So Sebastian's passages are there's no quotation marks. They're just in these giant blocks of text. And to me, that I felt like that really captured the idea of someone just really trapped in their own head, lost in their own thoughts, their own memories, but also kind of building a wall around himself brick by brick. And then on the opposite end, just again, to be wildly divergent, Oscar's narrative sections, or I don't know, what would you call that, Stephen? Like just classic, classic.
Well, but it's a classic, which sort of, I guess, throws back to like he's more interested in a more traditional or historical gay perspective, but also it's looser too. On the page,
Yes.
there's more white space. It's a little more, which is also feeds into sort of how Oscar feels as a character. I just found it fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
And even with Sebastian being who teaches sort of art history, is that fair to say?
Yeah, he teaches art history and English.
So that him having a look almost that you could read into, like you were reading something visual, like you were reading a painting or something. It was really fascinating.
Thanks. I'm very happy you caught on to that.
Yeah. So I'm just looking at my notes here because I want to get these characters' names right. So two of the more fascinating sort of supporting characters are Sebastian's student, Arthur Ayer, who sort of, who's 17 and sort of represents the next generation.
As he says at one point in the novel, he has been out since the womb, practically.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other side of that, Oscar befriends an older gay novelist named Sean Stokes.
Yes.
Who sort of represents the generation above our two leads.
Yes.
And so to see them each interact with generation before and behind, sort of the bookends to our story, is really fascinating. Arthur, for instance, I think about this a lot now too, with students being able to take a same-sex date to a junior high prom, or having a gay straight alliance, or being out since the womb. Part of me, I so embrace that too, but also I worry a little bit. It's not that I want anyone to suffer, but there's so much about gay culture that is achieved through having struggled. And part of me is like, well, if we have well-adjusted gay 8-year-olds, then there's going to be no more comedy, or there's going to be no more. But it's the death of art.
Stephen, isn't this what we want, though? And
I know this is what we want.
There's kind of the complex emotional drama, right?
Right. See, we're stuck in between.
Yeah. So there was, maybe it was like 5 or 6 years ago. There was this YouTube clip of this interview between these two British people. One was like a 13-year-old boy, and the other was a man in his maybe 70s, right? And they were both gay, and they were both talking about their wildly divergent experiences. And I just remember, and of course it's lovely. It's just a lovely conversation. It's lovely to see. But the writer in me had a very perverse thought, which is that, like, if I were this older gentleman, I would be looking at this proud 13-year-old kid and being like, you have it so fucking easy.
Yeah.
Right. Like, to your point about struggle being a kind of defining aspect of what it means to be queer. And then so if the logical progression is that we're trying to build toward a world where future generations don't suffer the way that previous generations do, then are we going to have to reframe our ideas about what makes someone queer if suffering is so integral to that? Now, to kind of spoil it for you, unfortunately, knowing human nature, I don't think that suffering is going to go anywhere.
No, I don't either.
Unfortunately.
The nature of the suffering may change, but suffering is part of the human experience.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's a little bit mirrors sort of the racial reckoning with the country, that's so long and slow, this journey for the country. And so you have to learn the history of it.
Yeah.
It's interesting, sort of queer rights have been, it's happened so quickly comparatively. And so I'm worried that because it's moving so fast, that some of that history just sort of falls away. And so I hope that history, and now that's sort of more what Sean represents, the character and the other, that we really keep that as part of our community curriculum, as you were.
Yeah.
Like there's a whole, like if you watch a Drag Race now or something, there's a whole generation of young queens who think, who might think that drag history starts with season 1 or 2 of RuPaul's Drag Race. And you want to be
I never thought of it that way.
No, you get your hands on Paris is Burning, or like So, so those two characters were really, really fascinating.
Yeah, and
for me, and I wonder what it was like to jump sort of into the mindset of two characters who were very different than your lived experience.
It was nice in the writing because I think as soon as I maybe got, so I didn't write each character's arc separately and then braid them together afterwards. I would write progressively through first drafts and subsequent drafts. So, I would write for a while in one voice and then kind of be like, I'm a little tired of this, and then switch to another voice and then write in that voice for a while and then switch back and forth. And so there was a rhythm for me, not only in the writing, but a rhythm that I hope kind of carries over in the reading experience. I remain unconvinced that either of these voices would have been enough to sustain an entire novel. I think the strength of the novel requires them to be alternating back and forth and to be kind of mirroring each other in obvious ways, but then in hopefully some subtle ways, as well.
Yeah. And I don't want to think, well, first of all, I want to remind anyone listening, please, we don't bite. If you have questions, feel free to ask. We're happy to dive into any questions that you may have. So keep that in mind as we
otherwise I'm just going to be fangirling about Lily and the Octopus. So
well, we can get to that in a second too. But I don't want to spoil anything. So, but one of the things I do want to touch on before we move on is I was thinking just sort of in a more general way. If you grow up in a generation where marriage is allowed, where you can get married, it could get to the point where a radical act is to not get married. And conversely, if you have grown up, if you've been a queer man, and marriage became legalized when you were in your 60s or 70s, it may feel like a very radical act.
Yeah.
To get married.
I'm glad you pointed that out because it suggests that even the definition of what is queer changes, right? It's not set in stone. Like the word itself, it is constantly evolving, and what is queer now may likely not be queer 50 years from now. It might be
even the word. Where I actually prefer queer now, but when I came out, I never would have used that word because that was
same here.
It hadn't been reclaimed yet in the same way. Like I was very specifically gay. Now I like the word queer because I like the umbrella that it.
It's just it's more inclusive, and to me it's more suggestive of a community, whereas I feel like we're so good at like coming up with these categories and these kind of pens in which to confine ourselves and these definitions about, and I just feel like queer is just a very kind of porous word for what is really kind of a very porous community that lives on a multitude of spectrums.
Yeah, it's just a sort of late breaking news here. We got a breaking news banner across the bottom. Just as before we started chatting, I was looking at my phone, and there was a news story that broke that Generation Z, younger than millennials, right? Gen Z, that there's something like 11 or 12% of them identify as LGBTQIA, or queer, whereas that number was much more, much smaller. I mean, it was a number that was so staggering for Gen Z that it bumped the average up for the entire queer community in the country. And
I mean, we really are taking over the world,
right? But it just goes to show, like, it's more inclusive now, the definition, 1, 2, and it's a safer, better world. It's not safe for everyone, but it is safer and better.
Yes, relative.
We're moving in the right direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's important. Whenever people discuss progress, and it's something I've always had to keep in my mind when talking about this book, is that yes, like a lot of things have gotten so much better. Things are still pretty terrible for a lot of people, but we also do a huge disservice to all the hard work that's been done by so many people before us to not admit that things are markedly different than they were for me, for you, and for men, before us, people before us, excuse me.
For sure. I I'm trying to see if we have touched on all the things. Oh, there was one line. I just love this so much. Where Oscar and Sebastian sort of are described as parallel lines, and the retort to that is parallel lines converged at some point, and Oscar, I think it was Oscar's comeback is in infinity. But I love that so much. It was sort of
and then the writer Sean's retort is patience is a virtue.
Yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. There's another exchange they have too, where it's I don't have this one written down, so it's like Oscar thinks we've lost a lot, we've lost so much. And Sean's retort to that is, but we've gained so much more. I think it's just so fascinating, those two characters.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say, so one of the kind of chief markers of difference for me between Oscar and Sebastian, and it is certainly kind of their ideas of what it means to be a gay man, but on a larger sense, it's really about their relationship to the past, right? Sebastian is overwhelmed and so consumed by the past that it's all he can think about. And then you see Oscar, especially in his interactions with the writer Sean, either can't be bothered to remember the past, his own personal history with his childhood friend, or just kind of has a very sophomoric idea about history. And so thinking about these two 30-something men, their relationship with the past, to me, that is what sets them apart from each other, and then also from the people that they interact with in their own kind of parallel narratives.
Yeah. Well, it's so great. I love the book because it just gets you thinking about so much. And we actually have a request for you to read do you have a small section that you have prepared? Not to put you on the spot.
No. I'll preface this by saying, so this is there are numerous instances throughout the novel in the Sebastian sections where he is using works of art that he encounters either in his classroom or in art catalogs or walking through museums, and using these as kind of a lens through which to kind of process his own feelings and his own memories. So, and I just had a really fun time writing those. So I think I will read maybe one, possibly two of those, if that's okay with you. All right.
That's great.
So this work of art is Statue of a Bearded Hercules, unknown, 68 to 98 CE. The first butt I feel, other than my own, is made of stone. I'm 6 years old, following my parents through the cavernous belly of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The vast space, the way it carries voices, makes me uneasy. We wander among Greek and Roman statues and sarcophagi. I think all these statues are broken. Why doesn't someone fix them? Still, I'm captivated by the pale, cold flesh on display, the smooth muscles and powerful poses, the stubby penises with their testicles like figs. My mother draws my attention to a tall, imposing man whose head is being swallowed by a lion. That's Hercules, she says. He was an ancient hero. He killed that lion and is wearing its skin. See the paws? I stand and look with her. Then she moves on to follow my father toward a giant stone column, also broken. I walk around the statue of the ancient hero, embarrassed and entranced by marble buttocks as big as my head. I see a huge dimple in the left one, as if someone had punched it. Without another thought, I step onto the small dais where the man of marble stands and, stretching on my toes, place a hand against the concavity. I feel a shock of cold, then a growing warmth. Whether it's my hand or the statue's that's warming, I can't decide. The museum guard barks. My father hisses. Sebastian, my mother cries, rushing over and pulling me away from the statue. No touching. Never touch. Later that night, back in our hotel, my parents already lost to sleep. I think about the marble statue of Hercules in the dark and quiet of the museum, stuck in his eternal stance, grateful for a brief moment of contact with a human hand not wielding a chisel. So there we go.
Yay. That's really great.
Thanks, Eric.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. And anybody have further questions, certainly let us know. I've been thinking a lot about queer history and changes in my own writing. So the book The Gunkle that comes out is basically anti-Mame, but it's basically Uncle Mame.
Well, I'm a Gunkle, a new Gunkle as well. So I plan to go through your novel with a highlighter.
Okay, good. Well, I'm not sure it was written as an instructional manual, but or a cautionary tale, but we'll see. But I was thinking, even Patrick Dennis, the author of Anti-Mame has such a history. It was a novel, and then a film with Rosalind Russell. A Broadway show with Rosalind Russell, then a film with Rosalind, then a Broadway musical, and then a very misguided film musical with Lucille Ball. And so, but like a lot of these sort of big, colorful women who were sort of created in the mid-century, in the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, were written by closeted men who couldn't openly write about themselves. And so the way to create queer characters was to use sort of women, sort of body women often as stand-ins, as sort of Mame was. So it was very interesting to reclaim something like that, reclaim a character like that for the queer community.
That reminds me that sometimes I kind of look at my past and I pinpoint when my first inkling was that I was queer, and I talking about just the kind of allure of these very powerful women. I have to say, and maybe this says a lot about me, but it was Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman in Batman Returns. That was my first conception of a diva. That was just a woman I just found fascinating in ways that weren't about sex, but about power, and about presence, and kind of all the things that I think a lot of gay men appreciate in their divas.
Yeah. Oh, it's fascinating. And then, she's in latex too. So there's, we won't even get into like kink.
That didn't stick so much, not to give you too much of a window into my personal.
Well, I would still watch a Michelle Pfeiffer Catwoman movie.
I would. If she did it, I would be there in a heartbeat.
Yeah. So we have a question from Patrick. And I always find this so interesting. I always want to know this from other writers too. It's like, so do you sort of, are you an outliner? Do you sort of know where the whole thing is going before you sit down and write, or are there parts of the story that happen that you discover as you write that you didn't perhaps initially intend at the outset?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Patrick. I'm too much of a control freak to just kind of write by the seat of my pants, right, and just start with a sentence and then see where it carries me. So I always kind of have think of them as like bumper lanes in a bowling alley, right? Like the ball can go in whatever direction it's heading towards a specific destination. And there are kind of these guidelines guiding it on their journey, but I still do like to open myself up to surprises, and there certainly were moments in this novel where I was surprised, A, that what I was writing, and then B, that in subsequent drafts I kept it. And I feel like I can't mention those points without really kind of spoiling the book.
Yeah.
I feel like if you read the book, you'll probably know them when you come across them. So even though I do kind of plan a lot, Patrick, that I still leave room for discovery. I mean, that's kind of one of the joys. I don't know. Are you the same way when you write?
I subscribe to the sort of headlight theory of where it's basically like, if you think of it, if you're driving a car on a dark night, you can, I know what's going to happen about as far ahead as I can see.
Okay.
I'm not a major outliner, so but then like just beyond where the light reaches, I don't quite have that figured out yet. And to me, that leaves room for surprise. Otherwise, I know great outliners who outline to the letter every single thing that's going to happen before they write a word.
Sure.
And to me, then it feels like work, right? Then it feels like I have a hard time motivating myself to get in the chair and write, because if I'm just there's no room for surprise.
It's more of a task than a game.
Yeah, but if I don't know everything that's going to happen that day, then it's exciting for me to want to tackle it.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned Lily too, so my first novel, Lily and the Octopus, was about a dog with a small octopus stuck to her head, and with that, it's like, how do you outline that? I mean, the octopus came out early, as this vision to me, because I knew what I wanted to write about was attachment and how difficult it can be to let go.
Yeah.
And so having a tentacular metaphor made sense to me, but it's weird. Mm-hmm. So there was no outlining that. I just sort of had to jump in with both feet and see how that. Yeah. See how that plays out.
Ultimately, Steven, it's whatever works for that particular writer, right? If there's one thing I've kind of learned, having slogged through so many author interviews, just kind of on my own, to kind of see what makes authors tick, and to think of my own writing. It's the secret is that there's no real secret. It's really just about cultivating an environment and a craft that works for your particular sensibilities.
Yeah, the secret is showing up. That's kind of the secret. There's no way around having to do the work. So.
Yeah. I mean, I used to read interviews with the Paris Review interviews with people like Don DeLillo, and I remember I think he would stop writing at noon and go jogging, and I thought, well, shit, if I do that, then maybe I can write like Don DeLillo. You're kind of looking for all these little things, but that may work for him, but that doesn't necessarily work for you, and that's kind of the real fear, especially when you're starting out as a writer, is you are kind of having to navigate this on your own. I'm working on another project, and I kind of know now what to expect, in the sense that, you're not always going to have productive days, right? Yeah. You are going to have hours and days and where you think you're an imposter. But I know now, I work best in the morning writing, for 2 to 3 hours. And, I know that for me, I need to write forward. I can't go back and edit things until I have a stack of papers next to me and a completed first draft that maybe admittedly a lot of it is crap. But to me, it's just very empowering seeing just that physical object and knowing that, okay, well, it's out of my head now. There's a lot that I can do with it.
Right. Yeah. I would say too, for any writers who are listening too, I think it's important to sort of understand yourself and not try to work against your own grain, as it were. Yeah. If you say 2 to 3 hours in the morning, don't try to do 7 hours at night. I knew when I sat down at the computer, what used to happen is I would check Twitter, or I would, check whatever, social media, or the headlines or something. And I realized that, I wasted an hour of my writing time. Yeah. And then I would beat myself up for another hour for having wasted the first hour. And then I wasted 2 hours. Yeah. But if I understood that I needed to have an hour at the computer before I could write the first word, then I can build that in and know that it's part of my process. And then I'm not wasting extra time.
Yeah, it gets better in that sense, that the more you write and the more projects you work on, the more confident you are that maybe what you're writing is not the right thing, but you at least know what you're doing in terms of the physical act of writing, which especially with the internet is such a chore.
Yeah, for sure. Especially, when you're writing more than 280 characters or whatever a tweet is.
You tweet a lot more than me. I'm really admirable. I admire that.
It's a waste of time. Next time you see me on there, tell me to stop it.
I feel like all writers are tweeting, and maybe I should too. But
right. Well, I don't know. That's the C material. It's like all my good jokes are in the book. You have to pay for that. These are the freebies. Like somebody was complaining about a tweet. I didn't, and that one fell flat. I was like, well, you know what? You're getting it for free. What?
Yeah. Oh man.
What do you expect? Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah. If anybody has any further questions, look, he's back. You might have a question.
I do. So Patrick's question made me think of a related one that I always find interesting as well is for both of you, what type of readers are you while working, while writing? Are you can and do read novels while you're writing a novel, or are you the type who try to read something completely different than what you're trying to put on the page?
Oh, that's a really good question. For this book specifically, I tried to stay away from novels about gay men and gay culture. Not because specifically because I was just terrified of being intimidated. Right? Like you read a novel by Garth Greenwell. Or Alexander Chee or Andrew Holleran or Edmund White or who have you, and you're like, well, it's all been said. Like, what else do I need to say, right? So I specifically avoided those kind of novels just for my own kind of personal psychology. But I have to keep reading when I write, because sometimes just reading something good, like a good work of nonfiction or a novel or a short story, or even a film or a piece of music, for me, it really just does a lot to sustain me and kind of rejuvenate me and make me want to go back to my desk and work at my craft.
Yeah, I think reading is such an essential part of the work. I know the danger, if you're a new writer or young writer, is that it's very easy to slip into someone else's voice if you don't have a strong, confident image of who you are as a writer. And so, early on, maybe it's best try not to read something too similar to what you're working on for that danger. But once you have a sense of your own voice and the confidence of your work, I really do think reading it's just such an essential. It's such an input output of art form, what we do. And right now, when we're all sheltering at home or we're not out and about, it's very difficult to refill those coffers, right? The input part is really difficult right now, and where we get that is through books. When we can't be out listening to conversations or observing human behavior in person, or even when we can, everyone has a mask on, and so we're not getting the full view. That books are essential.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and I love this question, and maybe this is a good way to end. But from Dennis, what's your hope for how the book will impact readers? Do you have any hope for how it's received, or do you think that's kind of out of your hands?
It really is, Dennis, out of my hands. And that's part of the publishing process is learning how to let go and to kind of, because you've spent years kind of working on something, and then it really is out of my hands. Dennis, if you're on the Nobel Committee, then I certainly hope that it will impact you. but no, to answer your question somewhat seriously, I've always thought that, look, this book is very gay and unapologetically so, but it also really is about a kind of larger concern of mine, and this is where I hope it becomes accessible to everyone. It's really just about how people cope with the passing of time, right? Like we all do, we all have to. Time is moving forward, and that can be exciting and frightening and terrifying, depending on where you are in your life or where you are kind of in your own personal development and yeah. So this book is about gay men, but I also hope it kind of teaches just sounds like a really silly word, but perhaps maybe illuminates sounds just like I'm full of shit, but I'm going to use that word anyway. Just illuminates people about how we process time.
Right. Look, this book is filled with ideas. I will say that. And look, we've been talking for an hour. It went by like that. And a lot of our conversation wasn't specific to things that are in the book or plot points or the characters themselves. It's just, it inspires so much thought. And I really congratulate you. And on a debut like that, that's you really stuck a landing on this, and that's great. And so also recommend everyone get it from an independent bookstore, particularly
Yes,
Magazine Quinn. We want our independent bookstores to not only survive this time, but to truly thrive, because we need them. These are anchors in our communities for so many reasons, and to bring programming back live in-person visits. We all hope for that soon.
Yes.
So we need our bookstores to thrive. So support your local independent bookstore.
I second that wholeheartedly, and I will also say it's very disappointing to just get one book in the mail. So why not
order
like The Editor or Lily and the Octopus to your order from this wonderful bookstore? Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zach and Steven. That was, like Steven said, it went by very fast. It was great conversation, and thank you all for watching and for your questions. It's great to see you here virtually. And yeah, don't forget to, if you are one of the people who pre-registered for the event, use that coupon code and head to our website and see what you like. Get a few books. Thanks again, and have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.